Hello and welcome to another episode of or another stream here on my channel. And today it's another new format I'd like to present all of you. And we are talking about the Writing Center of Excellence together with my lovely guest Christina. So hello over there. Um, yeah, nice that you've tuned in and a warm welcome. So how are you
Thanks.
doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, so it is incredibly warm outside. We're still hitting like 40-degree temps. So I'm definitely ready for fall, but all in all, doing well.
Awesome. Thanks for doing the calculation because I would not have been able to do the cross calculation from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Yeah, and personally, I am also joining today from a different location, which is not my beloved Bavarian region, but it's, yeah, North Rhine-Westphalia. Visiting my parents, so maybe, hopefully, the internet connection is stable enough. There's this common issue with being at your parents' house and you are not aware of how all the technical setups is going to perform. So let's see whether it's going to be stable or not. Yeah, and other than this, let's dive right into the topic because personally, I don't have a very famous beverage with me this time. Only some water with grape juice, some grape juice spritz. It's like Apfelschorle. We had it last time. So yeah, Christina, do you have any cold beverage with you would like to talk about, or do you have one in mind which is important to you?
Usually I have tea in the mornings, but I'm lame today. I just have water, just my water.
Very healthy. Awesome. Cool. So yeah, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? What's your current role at Camunda, and yeah, what are you currently working on?
Yeah, I'm Christina. I am the technical writer with Camunda. I started, gosh, now it's been like all over 15 months, I think, since I started with the company. And so yeah, I work on all of our documentation, our blogs, that sort of thing, lots of technical reviews, and GitHub repos that I'm working in. Uh, Currently, what am I working on? I'm continuing to expand the Writing Center of Excellence and working to make that more available both internally and externally, in an effort to help increase self-service and those interested in improving their writing, whether or not that be technical documentation itself.
Yeah, sounds interesting for sure. And the whole topic of documentation is also a bullet point we'll target on later on. So yeah, thanks for the little introduction. And yeah, what was actually, because I know you've mentioned this some time ago, and I do remember it was kind of interesting. I think your path into technical writing was somehow different than usual, maybe.
Yep.
I cannot recall it completely, but I think it's just an interesting thing to mention again.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for me, when I was at university, I got two degrees, one in journalism and one in psychology. And I was pretty headstrong on going into the newspaper and magazine industry. I loved to write. I have loved to write my entire life. It's not always come easy, as it does for some people, but it's something that I have always enjoyed doing and working with others on. And so for me, while I was in university, I had the opportunity to work in both London and Seattle for different newspapers and magazines at the time. And I predominantly did food and travel writing, which was very interesting. I'd visit restaurants, I would travel to new destinations around Washington State and explore. And while I loved those adventures, I didn't necessarily feel super challenged at work. I felt like something was just kind of missing. And I didn't really feel like I was growing. And especially after coming out of university where you're learning new things every day, I didn't, I didn't want to there. And so for me, I was living in Seattle at the time, and of course that is such a tech hub with Microsoft and Amazon. And all of my friends, we'd sit around the table at dinner and they would always be talking about their work that they were doing at Amazon or Microsoft or Google. And I was like, I kind of wish they seem very energetic about what they're talking about. I kind of wish that I knew exactly what they were talking about or what world of tech, how it operates. And so being in that environment, I hopped into a full stack course to just test out how I enjoyed it. I had classes Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. So right after work, I would go straight into class for like 2 or 3 hours. And then my Saturdays were also consumed with full stack courses. So I went through the grind of that and I was like, I actually really, really enjoy this. Like I love this is the challenge that I was looking for at work. This is the sense of growth and learning that I was looking for. And so at the time I was like, okay, well, how can I blend my writing background, my editorial background into the world of tech? I wasn't necessarily ready to be like, I want to be a engineer or a developer. I still loved writing, and so I wanted to be able to blend the two worlds together. Hence, why technical writing became the perfect role for me. And so I've been doing that over the last several years. Still learning every day, still improving my writing every day. I will be improving my writing for 50 years. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into what I do now.
To me, this story is so fascinating. Like you had those 2 degrees in psychology you mentioned, and then moving towards kind of the tech space and getting into this whole topic, and also like doing these courses next or besides of working. Those full stack courses. That's a lot of work. So congratulations that you've made it here. It's for
Thanks.
sure quite hard. Yeah.
It 100%, and especially given, in class, I was surrounded by people who were working in software, people who, were experienced with different languages, and I didn't even know Markdown. I was really learning the basics,
Yeah.
and so it definitely tears were shed during that course. It was not easy, but it was so worth it.
But now you are like a king or a queen in Markdown, right? So all the documentation we do have is written in Markdown, so you know your way around it.
100%. If anyone needs a Markdown 101, I got you covered.
Yeah, that might be a very interesting next topic for another stream,
Yeah.
right? Awesome. So yeah, as mentioned, documentation. That's also kind of one big topic you're working on. So my question would be: was there once a pull request which just stuck in your head? Maybe because it was so good, maybe because it was so bad, and then we can move from this whole documentation topic to also understand why there's or why you have established this working writing center of excellence, um, and why this whole thing makes sense and is so important.
Yeah, 100%. I I don't think I really understood the challenges that you can face with technical writing until years ago, before my work with Kamunda. I was reviewing a couple PRs for an IT department, and as I was doing that, there was one PR that was just like hundreds of lines of code and nothing else. And I was like, okay, not only do I have no idea what's going on in this code, but there's no text. There's literally none. And so from that moment, it definitely turned into, okay, this is not just a docs review. This is like, I am authoring all of this content because we basically have none other than code snippets.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I definitely encounter PRs now where I don't have to touch them. They're great as they are. So you definitely get both extremes.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty good. Never happened with mine though. Something. I need to get better. I do actually read the writing style guide you've come up with today, and there were just again a few things which I forgot over and over again, which then stuck again in my mind. And we also have kind of a document later on we'll both work on, or Christina will work on, and I'm getting invited. And I've tried to add some more mistakes to it, and it wasn't that easy, to be honest. To adding mistakes on purpose it was difficult. So yeah, let's see. That will be a fun thing for later, for sure. Um, awesome. So yeah, I think from only code to documentation and to writing the content, that's quite a lot of work and quite impressive. Also taking into account how the Camunda documentation for Camunda 8 we currently have, how it looked like and how it's accepted. So in the community, we usually hear that this documentation is like so good, and you've contributed a lot to it, and that's for sure also a shout out. I see Thales is also watching the stream in his lunchtime, so yeah, he's writing "There Goes My Hero." So there you can see what you have done. A lot.
Charles is my hero. So
That's so cool. Cool. Yeah, another thing in regards to PRs which came up to my mind while formalizing these questions was, what is the most common, or what are the most common things you notice when you actually need to fix PRs? So when there's a thing which needs to be done, is there a possibility to categorize it in such a way?
yeah, 100%. I think, I've drafted out the whole style guide, which is very lengthy, of course. There's a lot of content there because I don't want a stone unturned. If there's a question asked about styling, it's going to be added to the style guide. There's no limitations to that. But I think that the cheat sheet that we have developed at Kamuna has been super helpful in pointing out, okay, if you were to take the whole style guide and pick, 10 things or 15 things that stand out most often in documentation, what would those be? And I think when I'm looking at technical documentation, it's usually nitpicky things, that I understand I'm like the fun police because I am having to, pick apart things that, to some people they might be like, but why does it matter, And obviously it's a sense of consistency and dependency that when users visit any of our documentation, we want it to look and act the same. We want it to be reliable. We don't want it to appear as though each chapter is written by a different person, right? We want it to all flow together as one novel. So when I'm looking at the cheat sheet, I think one big thing that we have worked on over the last 15 months or so is the confusion between quotation marks, bolding, and italics. I think, when you're looking at, book titles or, okay, when do I use quotes? When am I supposed to bold a word? When do I put things in italics? And the quick and simple answer to that is if it's a UI element, it's going to be bolded. So if you're referencing a button or something that the user is clicking on or interacting with, it's always bolded. So that's one thing that frequently in the docs that I think establishing the differences between punctuation and grammar with those aspects has been helpful. And then I think for the most part, figuring out like the cadence of writing. So the flow of how you write,
Yeah.
which is obviously more difficult than just bolding UI elements, right? Like this takes a long time to practice, but I think it's a sense of, okay, when do I add a comma? when do I start a new sentence? When do I start a new paragraph, right?
Mhm.
And so I think one thing that's really helped me with that is actually when you write something, like speak it out loud. And that can help you see, okay, where do I naturally pause in my conversation? Or where does it feel like I'm transitioning into a new subject? And that can really help direct, okay, if I'm naturally pausing here in the sentence, I should add a comma. Or,
Mhm.
okay, if I stop talking here, I should add a period and start a new sentence. So I
Yeah.
think actually speaking your documentation out loud can be really helpful with establishing a good flow for the reader via
Mhm.
punctuation.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fun thing you mentioned, especially about those commas. Um, I had also back in university, my math professor was from the States, and I wrote some of my assignments also in English. And the only thing I remember was every time I added a comma to the sentence, it was at the wrong place because somehow there's a huge difference in German and English. So my rule of thumb nowadays is always I don't make any commas at all, and later on I really try to add just a few, and I know it's just plain wrong. So I'm sorry for you to add these commas back, but it's so difficult. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Another fun thing I just wanted to touch on was you've mentioned the documentation should be read as one piece of literature. Basically, you should notice that different people are editing and authoring this kind of piece. How does this differ to blog posts, for instance? Because there you want to have this distinct personality from times to times, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it largely is just based on what is your environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this content is living in. And in the case of our technical documentation, you don't see a byline with the author's name. You don't know who's writing it, or who's written it. It's all, we don't have a name to it because we all collectively contribute to it as
Mm-hmm.
one piece, right? And then I think when it comes to the blog, you do have a sense of, okay, I can have a little more fun with this because I'm not just achieving a task in technical documentation or trying to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. But in a blog, you have the opportunity to tell more of a story. It's appropriate to have more fluff there than in technical documentation because you have to consider, why is someone visiting this environment, right? And it's usually people are visiting the technical documentation because either they've hit, a bug, or they've hit an issue.
Mm-hmm.
They're just trying to resolve a conflict as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in something like a blog, someone might be thinking, oh, I want to learn something new or something cool that I can add to something that I read in the technical documentation, right? So you have the opportunity to actually step through more of a story,
Mm-hmm.
something that's a little more like fun and engaging, that you might visit, in your free time. And so I think that understanding, okay, what is the environment that the documentation or that this content is in, and what is the audience, and what is the audience's goal? If it's to quickly achieve a task, then it's probably going to be within technical documentation and not within a
Mm-hmm.
blog.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That's definitely true. Um, I see that Talos has engaged with us, and he has written or shared with us how in his organization they are adding or referencing buttons. And I think when I do recall it correctly, today when I read through the style guide in order to properly prepare, I have seen that we advise this as kind of a best or a bad practice to use code snippet format in order to reference to button. Um, do you have kind of a reasoning for this, or have I just recalled it wrongly? Not sure.
Yeah, so I think that if you're curious, okay, well, why do you bold UI elements? And of course, this is Kamunda's style. So
Mhm.
different companies might, based on their audience or their goals, might say we want to style ours differently, and that's fine. what works for our documentation might not work for others' documentation,
Hmm.
and that's totally fine.
Okay.
But I think that for us, why do we bold our UI elements? It's because it helps distinguish text and what you're actually clicking on. What
Hmm.
exactly is a button supposed to look like? If I'm looking for something in Modeler, what exactly is that going to look like, and how can I separate that from the text that I'm referencing it
Yeah.
within? And
Yeah.
so bolding that and making it distinguishable is helpful.
Hmm. And of course, in our documentation, we also have quite a lot of code snippets from time to time, some kind of properties, BPMN properties we want to make visible. So that's why kind of those code snippets are reserved for something else. And by bolded, buttons are always visible as such, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point because, code snippets, I mean, the title kind of speaks for itself, right? Like it's for code. It's something that you might be directly typing into your terminal or into your command line. And that's very different from a UI element that you might be clicking within a product. So I think having clear distinction between those two is important so the user understands, okay, am I typing something in? Am I looking for a particular response in the terminal? Or am I, stepping through different buttons within the UI?
Yeah. Yeah. Just see a comment from a mirror that before you have joined, actually, italic has been very famous. Interesting to hear. And now it's not right. So it's not that often used anymore. Or is there a certain case where we use italic in our docs?
Yeah, so with italics, if you are applying direct emphasis to a word, like, for example, you must clone this repository,
Hmm.
right? Like must might be italicized because you're emphasizing
Okay.
the fact that you cannot move forward. You can't take the next steps until you've done this. I use italics very sparingly
Hmm.
because it sometimes can cause confusion. Usually it's overused in a lot of text. And so I think, you know, making it as minimal as possible and really only applying italics to something that is urgent or has to be emphasized for a particular reason, is kind of the best way to go about it.
Yeah, yeah. I think you always touch on these points where I'm especially good at. For instance, when I start using italics, I'm just overusing them. It's kind of so natural that you think, okay, now I've made that italic, I should now make, and then you end up with a paragraph which contains way too much bold or italic stuff, and it's just not that readable anymore due to this. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, everyone kind of has there are things that I overuse, like
Mm.
I'll notice I'm using certain terms too often, or I have way too many short sentences or way too many commas in this paragraph, like I
Mhm.
said, I'm still, working on my writing. I always will be. So, every it's this but this is, why we talk about technical documentation, because there's so much work that really goes into it that I think only until like over the last 5 to 10 years that it's technical writing has really started to gain momentum.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, no, agreed. Maybe since we are already half an hour is over, time flies by, and we haven't yet talked about the Writing Center of Excellence and the Style Guide in particular. That's like the other big half of this chat I want to bring up now. So how do you envision the Writing Center of Excellence? Why was it actually established? Was there a concrete reason for this to happen? And later on, we can also talk then about how this document or how it's structured. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Our engineers are incredible with documentation. They are really, really good with what they write and how they write it. And they always, teams look out for one another's documentation. They're great to say, okay, I have a question here about this, or I find that our engineering team as a whole is very
Mhm.
engaged in docs, which is great to have. It's rare.
Sure.
You don't always get it, but to be able to work with engineers who so well with their writing and work so well with one another on feedback is fantastic. And so for me, when I came into Kamunda, I realized, okay, I don't I don't need to teach our engineers how to write documentation. They know how to write about a feature or a product, and they're great at it. And so for me it was less, okay, how can I teach something, and more, okay, how can I continue to enable them or help support as they have questions about styling and the glossary and all of these different components we talk about with technical writing. How can I just help to continue answering these questions and enabling our engineers to do the great work that they're already doing?
Yeah.
Hence why the Writing Center of Excellence was created. And so this was really just an environment to create, okay, if you have questions about the style guide, if you just need a quick cheat sheet, here's where you can go. If you have questions about how UI elements are referenced in each component, here's where you can go. And then on top of that, okay, what are extension recommendations? What are, online resources that can help me step through, or, catch typos, or, for example, one of the components in the Writing Center of Excellence is online writing resources. And one of the Hemingway app, which tracks the readability of your document. So not necessarily just like, oh, grammatical suggestions or typos, but also, okay, our sentences broken up logically, our paragraphs broken up logically? Are we using terms that you could substitute for a simpler, more understandable term? Things like that. And so I think having these resources has been beneficial when people have questions about, hey, I've read through the style guide. How can I start incorporating that into, my daily practice of writing documentation? I'm like, well, here's a handful of resources, to help you out in your code editor, or, on the web, or, even if you're just looking to improve SEO, and, in a couple minutes, how can you make those adjustments? So I think having those resources has been helpful to continue to empower and support and engage our engineers in what they're writing.
Yeah,
And beyond,
for
not
sure.
just engineers, I should say, it's not just our engineering, it's also our content across Kamunda. It's blogs, it's the way that we're writing across all of our content. And, we as a company we do produce great content. And so for me, it was a sense of how can I consistently enable all these different groups to follow the same styling principles.
Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty awesome. And I just seen, like I said, I visited the conference page just this morning. We do have for the writing style guide, and it's quite popular. I think over 100 views over the past month, so it's well accepted. Have you actually noticed a decrease in mistakes happening since the style guide was put on or published?
Yeah, enormously.
Wow.
100%.
Okay.
And I think too, what's been interesting is not only do I see fewer issues, but even when I do see, like, oh, there's you know, uh, for example, oh, this button isn't bolded, or this term is not capitalized. I'll see other people in the company say, hey, according to the style guide, you might want to make this adjustment. So I'm like, oh my goodness, not
That's
only am I
awesome.
the fun police, but now everybody is the fun police. So.
No, that's ideal. What could be even better? And with that, you have kind of replicated your knowledge, so you can be even more efficient. And new people joining the company can be trained by others to actually write the meaningful documentation. Yeah, oh, that's pretty cool. Um, yeah, you've mentioned bringing this guide to more people out there. Um, is there a timeline available for this to get public, or any specific plans about this whole thing?
Yeah, 100%. The writing style guide, of course, is already available externally, and that's at com/brand/writing style guide. And so if you have questions about how that style guide operates, please don't hesitate to reach out. But beyond that, yes, I am working on material to help step through the materials that are in the Writing Center of Excellence, how I've set them up, why I've set them up that way, and then am working with the community as well to help with a sense of, okay, do you have questions? If so, how can I help you, among our community members? And so that is in the works. So definitely expect to see more of me moving forward because I am working to push more materials and more teaching materials external, um, as well as to help support internally.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Cool. Thanks for that information. And let me quickly check what else of questions I've got. I've tried to find the writing style guide because I haven't had it open, but of course, in just quick amount of time, I'm not able to because I was just aware of the internal view. So it's external already, which is great. I might be able to find a link afterwards. Let's see and post it to the chat. Um, yeah. So, is there anything about this guide and about the structure of this guide? I've seen you've tried to divide up the topic. Is it something worth mentioning here? How it's dividing itself up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the both the style guide and the cheat sheet are set up the exact same way. So it breaks down what are the goals, like what are your overall goals to consider before you even start writing documentation. For example, your objective, your audience, the way that you're going to frame what you want to talk about, and then it steps directly into grammar. So things like that you might see, like, let's go into the style guide. So you'll step into things like bolding, capitalization, dates, um, italics, which we've talked plenty about already, um, spacing, spelling, times, that sort of thing is all going to be characterized under grammar. And within that, we have what to avoid. So we've proposed examples of like maybe like mistakes that we have already seen in documentation that we've improved. So examples of what to avoid and then how to practice, this grammatical styling. And then beyond that, we step into punctuation, which honestly, there's so much conversation around punctuation because it, even for me, it still causes a lot of confusion with like semicolons, when do I use a hyphen, things like that. And so all of the punctuation we step through there, and then following that, we'll step into formatting, organization, and structure for conceptual pieces. So when I say conceptual pieces, usually this is a large chunk of like just paragraphs of text. So maybe it's an opening summary or an overview of your document subject. So things like, okay, when do I break apart paragraphs? How do I structure titles and headers? Things like that is going to be suggestions in the style guide for conceptual pieces. And then after that, we step through formatting, organization, and structure for implementation steps. So the actual action steps or like a series of numerical or process steps that a user is supposed to take and how you might outline that. And so things like, okay, when do I use bullets versus a bulleted list or a numerical list? Or, okay, when do I use a code block here? Or, when I reference a file name, how do I do that? And so that's all going to be within the section on implementation steps. And then lastly, we just have a small section on product names and other terminology because we do have a full glossary. And so things like, okay, with acronyms, when do I have to spell those out? When do I not have to spell those out? Job titles, what is the difference between process and workflow? That's a lot of what that section will discuss as well.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds like a lot. And this page is also very long and very complete. How long did it take you to create these kind of resources, though?
Yeah, I mean, it took about 3 months to have it like fully, okay, this is ready to, you know, put out internally as a style guide, but I'm adding to it every day. There's constantly
Awesome.
questions that come up that I say, okay, I'm going to add that to the style guide if that question was asked. However, externally, it was not made available until this past quarter. So it is brand new externally, which is super exciting. Hence why I want to be able to provide the rest of the Writing Center of Excellence resources on guidance around styling externally as well. So slowly those resources are, trickling out to our community, but yeah, it takes time and it's constantly, evolving and growing. Only recently did we all agree, okay, we're no longer going to hyphen open source, so we're still making changes and still making adjustments in it, and we'll continue to do so as questions come up, or we decide that we want to go different directions with styling. But yeah, so it's
Yeah.
a quick process, but a long process.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for this detailed overview. And now I would say, without any further ado, let's take a look on the writing style guide or writing center of excellence in action. So I have prepared a little blog post, which is not yet live, and of course that's the purpose of it. I wrote it on Monday, so if it's fresh out of the press, not yet released. It needs to be reviewed, so on and so forth, though might not be correct either way. And this morning I added some more mistakes to this. And now let's see how bad it actually is. I didn't add too many mistakes, I think, but let's see. I made a few things worse. But yeah, for sure, Christina, you will find a bunch of stuff. So yeah, we are here in Google Docs, so I can follow you around. And yeah, my suggested procedure would be to try following you and you explaining why certain things should be actually changed in here. So it's kind of like completely heads down, focusing on this extract of the blog post and figuring out what did I mess up, what did I do wrong, and how can this actually be improved.
Yeah, 100%. Let's jump in.
Cool.
Um, so first of all, major kudos for going in and making mistakes intentionally in your documentation. I think morally and ethically, I would not be able to do that personally. It's so difficult. Um, but cool. So I think that, I definitely want to start with the fact that when you are stepping through your docs and making suggestions or improvements, it does not need to be a rapid process if you have the time to take your time with it. We do have the cheat sheet to quickly move through things. But the key to great documentation is paying attention to the small things. And when you're moving so quickly, it's so easy to miss those. So I'm gonna go slow. But we have 19 minutes, so
We don't need to
okay.
get ready with the document. So it's only a copy of the official blog post. So we can mess up things. We don't need to get through completely, and we can take us like 50 minutes of time to just familiarize ourselves with it, and yeah, find some issues and hear some thoughts of you.
Cool. Yeah, so when I look at it, obviously I just noticed that there was an extra space in the title. So I just I just got rid of that. And then with Camunda, given that Camunda Platform 8 is semi-new and we get questions around like, okay, Platform 7, Platform 8, like, okay, 8 versus 7, we get questions around that. And so I always spell out the product in full.
Yeah.
Um, and then beyond that, I think that the user already understands that they're reading this as a guide. So I would just say Camunda Platform 8 for .NET developers. And if you're at Camunda, we use sentence case structure, hence why we lowercase developers. Whereas if this was title case, it would be uppercase. But according to our standards, we don't do that. So moving on, in the first paragraph, of course, our product is lowercase, so we face that.
Yeah,
So
that was a
with
built-in thing. It wasn't very much thought to it, but I thought, hey, let's see whether she catches it.
oh boy, okay, so with I feel like this is almost like a trap,
It isn't.
but with Kuna Platform 7, okay, so with Kuna Platform 7, there was always a slight hurdle if you wanted to use it as a workflow automation suite from a .NET development perspective. So I would say
There might be no trap at all. I really
okay.
didn't do anything on purpose.
Okay, so another thing I always look for in documentation is how can I tighten wording, because it tends to be like the more concise that you can be, the better in most cases.
Mhm.
So instead of saying even though that there were prepackaged distributions, I would say while there were prepackaged distributions available,
Mhm.
or better yet, while prepackaged distributions
Were available or
offered a REST API.
ooh, that's so good, so much better. Wow. Okay, the I added that into the sentence because personally, I think it's also quite a German thing that you like. I do it naturally all the time. I
Yeah.
mention that way too often, and I try to focus on not using it, but still it's showing up from times to times. And now I've just overdone it and added here and there a few that's. But even though I just added this one that word, now the sentence is so much clearer, shorter, and crisper, which is so awesome.
You know, the reason why I'm so nitpicky about concise language is because for so long, my biggest crux as a writer was having too much fluff in my writing. And that's
Mhm.
largely because in the world of magazines and, well, predominantly magazines over newspapers, you're encouraged to have a sense of like, add extra, wording and phrasing to make it more of a, a story. And so learning how to cut out text that does not benefit your subject has been super helpful for me. Um, so while prepackaged distributions offered a REST API, the deployment was always a different kind of story. Okay, so for me, I would comment here and say, okay, what do you mean by a different kind of story? Which maybe you'll get into, but I would
Mhm.
pinpoint exactly what the issue was with deployment. The deployment was,
Mhm.
for example, I would say the deployment caused issues because XYZ.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
with the switch to Kamuna Platform 8, powered by the ZB workflow engine, the tooling became truly language agnostic. So, I would say instead, the switch to Kamuna Platform 8, um, powered by the ZB workflow engine.
Mhm.
Let's see, the switch to Kamuna Platform 8, powered by the ZB workflow engine, um, created truly language agnostic tooling.
Yeah. Cool. I was kind of proud for the sentence beforehand because to me this already sounded pretty good. But no, it does make sense and it's even better. Yeah. Um, so even I learn way too much in today's session with you.
Yeah, it's just the little things like this, right, that actually add
Hmm.
up to be a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
so I think that the next sentence kind of starts talking about something new. Like, okay, so now we're going to get into a guide. And so in that case, I would create a new paragraph. Ideally, I'd
Hmm.
like to see paragraphs be between like ideally like 5 sentences total, 5 to 7 sentences.
Yeah.
So I would break that up. Hence, I would say instead of let me guide you, I would say this guide will step through the process of creating a process automation application in .NET, comma, leveraging all the potential Camunda 8 platform. That's a good trick too. Camunda
Oh, you
platform
catched me.
has to offer.
Hmm.
So when you say for sure this will be more rewarding than continuing using the Windows Workflow Foundation. So for this, if we might already, believe it, like we already know it because we've used the product, we for sure know it. But if a reader who's familiar with it is reading it for the first time, they might say, well, why is it more
Yeah.
rewarding? Give me the proof. And so here I would add a comment like, you know, um, can you explain why?
So now my question would be, so this might have been some kind of thesis which I want to prove through this blog or in this blog post. So is there a possibility to maybe transform it into something which is more like, let's see, or would it be okay to say, let's see if this solution is going to be more rewarding than the well-known Windows Workflow Foundation? And to then say, okay, in the end, we can conclude this blog post to if it's the case or not.
Right. 100%. So if you don't want to dip into like, okay, I don't want to give away everything that I'm about to talk about in this sentence, then I would instead just say something like, this guide will also step through why X is more rewarding than continuing using the Windows Workflow Foundation. So you're making a claim, but also saying, I'm going to tell you why, so I'm not just claiming something and then making you wonder, okay, wait, you've said something. Are you going to explain why it's like, I want to know why it's more rewarding. And so in this case, you're saying, okay, I'm claiming that it's going to be more rewarding, but I'm alluding to the fact that I will cover exactly why in the paragraphs to follow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Perfect. Then I will resolve the comment because now we don't need it anymore. Wonderful.
Yeah.
One down. Awesome.
So to see the structure of this blog post, we'll first need to take a look at how we get access to Camunda 8. So again, Camunda Platform 8. To set the structure of this blog post. Okay, so instead of saying this, I would just say, I would start a new paragraph and say, first, let's take a look at how we get access to Camunda Platform 8. So you're immediately jumping into, okay, we don't need the fluff of, this is just an example of how you can trim out some wording to just directly say, okay, first, let's get started with X, or let's get started with Y. So first, let's do, having talked about the foundations of the platform. First, let's see. So I would say after discussing the foundations of, and then for the platform, I would be totally clear here and say, okay, what platform are you talking about exactly? Just to be totally clear to the reader. So after discussing the foundations of the platform.
Of the Camunda platform, we could say. So this kind of refers to the Camunda platform, but I'm always, when I write those sentences, I notice the thing I'm trying to figure out is that I don't overuse certain words. And then I'm
Right.
asking myself, okay, how often do I have used the word Kommune Plattform 8 now in this kind of sentence, and whether it's making too much of a noise because it's such a long term. Um,
Right.
mhm. But yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think it absolutely makes sense, in certain cases. For example, down here, when you say blood alcohol concentration, you immediately uh, add the acronym for that. That
Yep.
is incredibly important so that moving forward, you do not have to spell that out every time, right?
Mhm.
So, like below it, you can just reference BAC because you've introduced what this acronym means on the first reference of it.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But of course, with product names, there is no acronym for product names. Um,
Apparently not. Yeah, that's true.
Um, so after discussing the foundations of the Kumuna platform, I'll say we'll then develop our application by designing our workflow. Cool. Next
Wonderful.
up. Oh, I see what you're saying here. So first,
So it's kind of this, yeah, the structure of, or trying to
yep,
elaborate over the structure of the whole document to give a user a rough idea what to expect in the following paragraphs and sections.
yep. Yeah, hence why I would say first we'll take a look at how we get access to Kamuna, or I would say first we'll take a look at how we access Kamuna Platform 8. So again, you can check the wording. After discussing the foundations of the Kamuna platform, we'll then develop our application by designing our workflow. Next, we'll Next, we'll investigate the ZBC Sharp client and make use of it in our .NET microservice. To conclude this blog post, we'll summarize the lessons learned and point out improvements in contrast to the Windows Workflow Foundation. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
So you
awesome.
alluded to that here, and then here you said, okay, I will, in the conclusion, we'll summarize what we've learned throughout the process in contrast to the Windows Workflow Foundation. So
Awesome.
that's an example of how I would step through this was originally just one big paragraph, right? And we've broken it up into manageable chunks. So I think, this is an example of how at first glance I would go through. And then, I might come back and say, okay, let's double check Windows Workflow Foundation. Is that exactly how Windows refers to it? Do they refer to it as an acronym? If they do, then I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up. If not, then we're going to keep it as it is. So, this is the trouble with technical writing is you can constantly be improving your documentation, right? You can constantly be making changes and suggestions and adjustments and iterating, and that's great. But you can definitely get into dangerous environments where you refuse to let people read something or you refuse to release something because you're like, it's not perfect, right? It's just not perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that looking at your writing is like, okay, this does not have to be perfect. I just want to keep improving. Each day I just want the document that I write tomorrow to be a little bit better than the document I wrote today
Yeah.
is fine. And I think that the best way to improve your writing or to work on content is not only to just keep writing all the time, but also to keep reading all the time. So read other developer content that you like and try to figure out, wait, why was this so easy for me to step through this guide? Or why did I really like this guide? And that can help provide guidance to you on how to improve your own writing.
Yeah. That's already almost a perfect summary of this whole experience here. There's just one last question coming in from Thales about the abbreviations C7 and C8 because the community or the users seem to already be pretty used to this kind of wording. Is there is there a guideline for using it in written pieces?
Yeah. So currently now, like I said, we still get questions about the product because, you know, certain features of our product are new. And so I think if we're still getting questions about it in our technical documentation, I'm absolutely still going to spell it out every time. Of course, that could change, that, we could decide as a company, you know what, I think that we can accept this product name. However, I'm not a product manager, so when it comes to guidance on how do we want to call things, how do we want to label things, it has to be consistent across all of our docs, until we decide that it should be different. And so sticking by that, I have seen documentation where a user is like, wait, you said, something like that. Obviously, this is not with Camino documentation, but hypothetically, a user would say, like, wait, what is C8? What's C7? You're introducing slang or,
Mm.
terms that I am not familiar with, and I don't want that to happen. So the best thing that you can do in that case is to be as clear as humanly possible in
Mm.
the terms and the products and the components that you're referencing.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it makes sense. Wonderful. Thanks for all these good tips and tricks. So now the first paragraph of my new blog post is already reviewed. And I think I need to make some changes for the coming up parts. So before you invest any time of reviewing it, give me a couple of days and I will fix these changes again.
I was
Um,
going through this with like a microscope, Thomas. So
no.
no stress. This was like me trying to make as many changes as
Yeah,
possible. So
but it was so good. It was really good. Appreciate it. Yeah, before really summing up and ending the session, is there a last thing you want to bring up? The most important thing for people who want to move in this direction to be better in writing their documentation. Is there anything which you haven't mentioned yet and is worth just pointing out again?
yeah, like I said, I would just keep writing and keep reading. I think some people just try to like write as much content as humanly possible, and they're like, why am I not getting better? And it's because
Mhm.
they're not studying great documentation. They're not reading great documentation, so they don't have takeaways that they can apply to their own docs. For
Yeah.
example, like, oh, this was better explained via a series of steps rather than paragraphs. So keep writing, keep reading, and pay attention to great docs around you and see how that can help improve your own documentation, and also just like be patient with yourself. I'm a technical writer and I still am learning constantly. I'm still seeing comments by the engineers where they ask a question in a doc and I'm like, oh, why didn't I think of that question? That was a great question. So we're constantly learning. Writing is very difficult and always changing and always shifting. So just be patient with yourself, and
Awesome.
the rest is going to take care of itself.
That's very well described and summed up. Thank you for being here and being a rock star on live editing. Yeah, this little snippet, it was very good. So Talis was right. You are kind of a hero. Where's your cape? Nah. So
No,
yeah, thanks for joining so much. It was also for me very beneficial to hear these thoughts and things you've mentioned. And for sure, I also need to pretty much grow into this area, especially if it's a foreign language. It's always hard to get those things right, and it's even more training. But also in German, it can be terrible. So I have no excuse, to be honest.
if it makes me feel any better, I'm studying German now, and I'm like, oh wow, now I understand why sentences are structured different ways. It's not easy.
Yeah,
But thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And any chance that I get to talk about docs, I geek out about it. So no
that's
shame.
super. Awesome. Yeah, thanks. And now I'm moving over to the next screen about what's next up. Next up, so a quick wave in your direction. And yeah, quickly chatting about next streams which are coming up. And there's one scheduled for next week about building a BPMN symbol together with George Wolf and an engineer of ours. We do have a new episode of the BPMN Clinic coming up soon as well. And there's still the forum and community news radar scheduled with Mia, which I actually have not scheduled yet. So I should get this done anytime soon. I know she's here listening to me. So yeah, awesome that you've all engaged so much in the chat and for being here. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hope to see you next time. Goodbye.